I was standing in my bedroom 30 minutes before the guests arrived, holding my dress in my hands, and there was a clean cut down the side of it, 6 inches long, hip to thigh. Not a snag, not a tear from a chair or nail, a cut. The kind you make on purpose, with scissors, when you want somebody to fall apart in front of a room full of people. And the worst part wasn't the dress. The worst part was that I already knew who did it. I'd known the second I saw it on the closet floor. By the end of that dinner, my sister-in-law wasn't the woman everyone thought she was. And honestly, neither was I. My name is Hannah Whitlock. I'm 29 years old. I work as a pediatric nurse at a hospital outside Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been married for 3 years to a man named Caleb, who teaches high school history and still gets nervous before parent-teacher conferences. We have a small house with a garden out back where I grow tomatoes that never quite ripen right, and we drink coffee on the porch every Sunday morning, whether it's freezing or 90 degrees. I grew up with very little. My mom raised me and my brother on a waitress's tips, and the first time I ever saw a dishwasher that wasn't a person was when I went to a friend's house in middle school. Caleb's family didn't grow up like that. His parents, Bill and Lorraine Whitlock, own a chain of family hardware stores spread across the Carolinas. It's not flashy money. They drive trucks that are 10 years old, and Lorraine still clips coupons. But it's old money by our small-town standards, and Lorraine is the kind of woman who notices things. She notices what fork you use. She notices when your shoes don't match your belt. She notices everything. And then there's Caleb's older sister, Bryn Whitlock Avery, 34, tall, blonde, the kind of pretty that wins pageants, which she did, 3 of them before she turned 20. She runs what she calls a lifestyle brand online, which, as far as I can tell, means she takes pictures of herself in nice kitchens and sells skincare. Her husband, Trent, is a real estate developer who works long hours and looks tired even at parties. From the day Caleb proposed to me, Bryn made it her personal project to remind me I didn't belong in the family. Never loud, never anything you could point at, just 1,000 small cuts, year after year, until you start to feel like maybe you really are the problem. The dinner that night was for my father-in-law's 65th birthday. 20 guests, family, business partners, the pastor and his wife, a couple of Bill's old college friends. I'd been helping Lorraine plan it for almost a month. I sewed the napkin rings myself out of cream-colored linen. I picked out the wine. I made place cards in my own handwriting because Lorraine said my handwriting was the prettiest in the family. And that was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever given me. I had one nice dress for that night, deep navy satin, simple, with a clean line that fell just past my knees. I'd saved up for 4 months to buy it. It was the first thing I'd ever bought myself that cost more than a week of groceries. And when I tried it on in the dressing room, I cried a little in the dressing room because for the first time in my life, I looked like the kind of woman who belonged at a table like the Whitlocks. Bryn showed up 2 hours before the dinner started. "Just to help," she said, breezing through the front door in a red wrap dress and heels she'd never worn to help with anything in her life. She floated around the kitchen while I was finishing the salad. She picked up one of my linen napkin rings, turned it over in her hand, and said, "Oh, Hannah, that's so homemade feeling. It's sweet." I smiled and said thank you. I'd learned a long time ago that the only thing worse than Bryn's compliments was reacting to them. Around 4:30, she asked if she could use the upstairs bathroom because the downstairs one was too crowded. There were 3 people in the house. I said sure. Of course, I said sure. I always said sure. 20 minutes later, I went upstairs to change into my dress. I opened the closet, and the dress wasn't on the hanger. It was on the floor, and there was that cut down the side, hip to thigh, the satin gaping open like a mouth. Right next to it, on the carpet, was a pair of small sewing scissors, my scissors, the ones I kept in my bedside drawer. My hands started shaking. I sat down on the edge of the bed and just looked at it for a minute because I think part of me didn't want to believe it. Part of me wanted to think a cat had gotten in, or it had snagged on something, or I was misremembering. But there was nothing to misremember. It was a clean, deliberate cut, and I'd heard her heels on the floor up here. I went downstairs. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew I had to look at her face. Bryn was standing in the kitchen with Lorraine, laughing about something, swirling a glass of white wine. She looked completely calm. Lorraine was laughing too, the kind of laugh she only ever did with her daughter. I opened my mouth, and then I closed it, because I suddenly understood the trap. If I walked into that kitchen and accused Bryn of cutting up my dress with no proof in front of her mother 2 hours before her father's birthday party, what was going to happen? Lorraine was going to look at me like I'd lost my mind. Bryn was going to cry, beautifully, the way she'd been crying beautifully since she was 4 years old, and by the end of the night, the story wouldn't be that Bryn ruined my dress. The story would be that the unstable daughter-in-law made a scene at Bill's birthday and accused his only daughter of something insane. I went back upstairs, and I decided I was going to wear the dress anyway. I pulled out my sewing kit. It used to belong to my grandmother. The thimble has her initials scratched into the bottom of it, and the needle case is one of those tin ones with flowers painted on the lid. I sat on the floor of my bedroom in my slip, and I hand-stitched the seam back together with navy thread. 12 minutes. The stitches weren't perfect. If you looked, you could see them. A tiny ladder of thread running up the side of the dress. While I sewed, I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the Christmas Bryn gave me a $5 gift card to a thrift store and laughed and said it was a joke gift. I thought about the baby shower for her cousin where Bryn told everyone, loud, in front of 15 women, that Caleb and I couldn't have kids, when I had never said that to anyone, not even to my husband. I had told Bryn, just Bryn, that I might want to wait a couple of years, and she had taken that and twisted it and dropped it like a coin in the middle of a baby shower. And I realized something, sitting there in my bedroom floor with a needle in my hand. The dress wasn't the first thing she'd tried to ruin. It was just the first thing I was going to refuse to let her ruin. I put the dress on, I did my hair, I put on the small pearl earrings Caleb had given me for our first anniversary, and I went downstairs. The guests were already arriving. Bill in his good blue blazer, looking slightly uncomfortable the way he always did when he had to dress up. Lorraine fluttering between the kitchen and the living room. The pastor's wife with a casserole. Bill's college friends with a bottle of bourbon in a gift bag. And Bryn, standing in the middle of the room in her red dress, holding court. When I came down the stairs, Caleb's eyes went soft. He met me at the bottom step and put his hand on the small of my back and whispered that I looked beautiful. He didn't notice the seam. Nobody noticed the seam. But Bryn did. I watched her face when she saw me come down. There was a flicker, just a second, the slightest stiffening of her smile. She had expected me to come down crying, or to not come down at all. She had expected to win, and I hadn't given her that. Dinner started at 7, 20 people around the long table in the dining room, candles down the middle, the napkin rings I'd sewn at every place, Bill at the head, Lorraine on his right, Bryn on his left. Caleb and I were down at the other end, which was fine with me. Bryn started right away. Little remarks dressed up as compliments. She told me I was so brave to wear navy with my skin tone. She turned to Caleb and asked, in front of his parents, if he remembered when he used to date girls who actually traveled. She told the pastor's wife that I was a nurse, but only at the children's hospital, not the real one. I stayed calm. I smiled. I asked Trent how his work was going. I asked the pastor's wife about her grandkids. Caleb's hand kept finding mine under the table. And then Bryn pivoted. I could feel it coming, the way you can feel a storm an hour before it hits.
She raised her voice just a little, just enough to pull the whole table in, and she started telling a story about how I had tried to borrow money from her last spring. $3,000, she said, for a problem with our credit cards. She said she had wanted to help, but Trent said no. She said it in this sad, gentle voice, like she was so sorry to bring it up, but somebody really should know. It was a complete lie. I had never asked her for a single dollar. I'd never asked anyone in that family for a single dollar. Heads turned. Lorraine looked uncomfortable. Bill frowned and set his fork down. The pastor's wife pretended to be very interested in her bread roll. I felt my face go hot. I looked at Caleb, and his jaw was tight, and I could see him about to stand up and defend me, about to say something he couldn't take back at his father's 65th birthday party. I put my hand on his under the table and squeezed it, just once. Not yet. He looked at me, and I shook my head a tiny bit. He let out a long breath. He stayed in his seat. And then, because life is strange, and sometimes it hands you exactly what you need, Bill's phone rang. He almost ignored it. He looked down at the screen, and then his face changed, and he excused himself and stepped into the hallway.
He was gone for almost 5 minutes. The table went quiet in that polite way tables go quiet when everyone can tell something is wrong, but no one wants to ask. Lorraine kept glancing at the doorway. Bryn kept eating, but slower. When Bill came back, he was pale. He sat down without speaking. Lorraine asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, slowly, "That was Doug from the bank. Somebody took out a line of credit against the Mooresville store last month, in my name, $42,000. They're calling because the first payment is past due, and they want to know if I authorized it." The table went completely silent. Bill looked around. He wasn't accusing anybody, not yet. But he said the loan officer described the woman who had come in, tall, blonde, in a cream-colored coat, said she had a notarized power of attorney, said she had told them she was handling things for her elderly father, who wasn't doing well. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Bryn's wine glass was halfway to her mouth. It stopped there, just stopped in midair, and then her hand moved very carefully and set it back down on the table. Trent, sitting next to her, slowly turned and looked at his wife. Lorraine started to say, "There's got to be some explanation," but her voice trailed off into nothing. And that's when I spoke, quietly, so quietly the people at the other end of the table had to lean in. I said, "I might know something that could help." Everybody looked at me. I pulled my phone out of the small purse hanging on the back of my chair. My hands were shaking, but I tried to keep them steady. 3 weeks earlier, I had been at Bill and Lorraine's house, helping Bill sort his medications. I do that sometimes because I'm a nurse, and because Bill's diabetes meds are complicated and Lorraine gets confused by the labels. While I was there, I had picked up the mail off the kitchen counter, the way I always did, and I had noticed something. There was a bank statement addressed to Bill, but there was a forwarding sticker over the original address. The forwarding address sent his mail somewhere else. The forwarding address was Bryn's house, and the handwriting on the sticker, the handwriting that filled in the new address, was Bryn's. I would know her handwriting anywhere. She'd written my Christmas cards in it for 3 years. I had taken a picture of it, just one. I hadn't shown it to anybody. I hadn't even told Caleb, because I wasn't sure what it meant, and because I absolutely knew how it would look if I was the one bringing accusations against Bryn. I slid my phone across the table to Bill. He looked at it for a long time. He pulled his reading glasses out of his shirt pocket and put them on and looked at it again. Then he took his glasses off and set them on the table and put his face in his hands. Bryn laughed. It came out too loud and too sharp, and it cracked in the middle. She said, "She's obviously been planning this. Daddy, you know she's been jealous of me since the day she walked in here. She's unstable. She's always been unstable." Trent was still staring at her. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, very flat, "Where did the new car come from, Bryn?" She turned to him, mouth open. He said,
Where did the down payment on the lake house come from? She stood up. She stood up too fast, and her knee hit the table, and her wine glass tipped over. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth in a long, dark stain soaking into the linen napkin rings I'd sewn by hand.
She tried to leave. She turned and walked toward the door, and I could see her hands shaking, and for 1 second, I almost felt sorry for her. Bill said her name, just once. Bryn. She stopped in the doorway. He didn't yell, he didn't even raise his voice. He just said, "Sit down, we're going to talk about this. All of it." She sat down. The rest of that night is mostly a blur. The guests left, slowly, awkwardly, the way people leave when they know they've just seen something they weren't supposed to see. The pastor's wife hugged me on the way out and didn't say a word, but she held on for a long time. Trent drove Bryn home in complete silence. Caleb walked Bill out to the back porch, and the two of them stood out there for almost an hour, and I could see Bill's shoulders shaking from the kitchen window. Around midnight, when the house was finally empty, I was at the kitchen sink washing dishes. Lorraine came in and picked up a towel and started drying without saying anything. We worked like that for a few minutes, just water and clinking plates. Then Lorraine said, without looking up, "Your dress is mended, hand-stitched. I noticed when you came down the stairs." I stopped. The plate I was holding went still in my hands. Lorraine kept drying. She said, "I noticed because I used to mend my own dresses too, before I married Bill. My mama taught me, and I taught Bryn, but Bryn never wanted to learn." She set the plate down. "I just want you to know. I saw it. I saw what you did tonight, and I saw what you didn't do." I couldn't speak. She said, softer, "I'm sorry it took me this long." And I cried. I cried for the first time all day, standing at her kitchen sink with my hands in soapy water, and Lorraine put her arms around me, and we stood there for a long time. The truth about Bryn came out over the next few weeks. The $42,000 from the Mooresville store wasn't even the half of it. There were other lines of credit cards she'd opened in her parents' names, almost $120,000 total, going back almost 2 years. Bill and Lorraine handled it quietly, the way that family handles everything. There was a family arrangement. Bryn paid back what she could. She and Trent moved out of state within the year. Trent filed for divorce 6 months after that. I haven't seen Bryn in almost 2 years. And I think about that night a lot, not the bad parts. I think about the moment I sat on my bedroom floor with my grandmother's sewing kit and decided to walk down those stairs in the dress she'd cut. Because for 3 years, I had thought being the bigger person meant staying small. I had thought being kind meant being quiet. I had thought every time somebody took scissors to me, the right thing to do was sew myself shut and pretend it never happened. That night taught me something different. The dress didn't make me belong at that table. Sitting down at it with the seam showing and my head up did. Lorraine and I have coffee every Sunday morning now. She comes to my house. She sits on the porch with me and Caleb, and she helps me with the tomatoes that never ripen right. Last spring, she taught me how to make her grandmother's biscuit recipe. I still have the navy dress. It's hanging in my closet right now. I never had the seam fixed properly. The hand stitches are still there, that little ladder of navy thread running up the side. I kept it that way on purpose. So if there's somebody in your life who keeps tearing your seams open, listen to me. You don't have to make a scene. You don't have to scream. You just have to keep showing up, mended, with your head up. Sooner or later, the room sees what they've been doing, and what you've been doing too.